What's up, everyone? Continuing on with this comparison train, dude. I've been doing so many of these comparisons, my brain is going on fire. But one of the main comparisons I want to do from the beginning, once I got the iPhone XR, was compared to the iPhone SE. If you guys remember, the iPhone SE, like in 2016, was the budget iPhone. It was like the smaller and cheaper iPhone that Apple sold. And actually, once the iPhone XR came out, the iPhone SE 6S and 6S Plus stopped being supported at the Apple Store. They're still supported for iOS and everything, but they're just not being sold in the Apple Store anymore. So I kind of want to see how the new budget iPhone holds up against the last budget iPhone. And the biggest difference, obviously the elephant in the room, the iPhone SE is much, much smaller than the iPhone XR. In terms of the front, we have a 4-inch screen on the iPhone SE, and we have a 6.1-inch screen on the iPhone XR. Now, believe it or not, even though the screens are different sizes and everything, because the resolution is so low, on the iPhone XR, they actually end up having the same PPI. So the iPhone SE, the screen resolution on that was 640 by 1136, and on the iPhone XR, it's 828 by 1792. So it is quite a bit lower on the iPhone XR, and I wish it was higher. Honestly, like, if you're comparing both of them, they both don't look that good. Or they both look pretty decent. It depends which way you look at it, glass half full or glass half empty. I don't think the iPhone XR screen is horrible. I don't think it's, like, unusable, but I just think it's not that good. Like, it's very mediocre for Apple just to push something like that, especially when we had the same PPI. And I'm not going to say it's the same resolution because the resolution on the iPhone XR is higher, but, I mean, it's not by much. I mean, the iPhone SE screen technically was not HD if you think about it. On paper, I would way rather have an iPhone XR screen, which is bigger than the iPhone SE screen, and it's different per phone. I would rather have an iPhone 8 screen than an iPhone XR. So again, like, it's kind of different, but a huge advantage of the iPhone XR is that you do have a true tone display. So that is kind of software based. If you guys don't know what it is, it pretty much just warms the colors of your panel. So that is kind of nice. It has like an AMOLED-esque kind of effect, but it's not really because it's not AMOLED, it's IPS. So I'll definitely say in terms of panels, the iPhone XR might have the advantage here, but even the fact that I have to think about it is pretty weird. Like, the iPhone SE does not cost $750 anymore. So now both phones do not support Force Touch, which is still crazy. I don't know why Apple did that. So I guess that's one similarity between them. Another advantage of the iPhone XR is that it does have IP67 dust and water resistance. So you can dip it up to 1 meter of water for up to 30 minutes. So that's pretty cool for a lot of people. The iPhone SE does not have anything like that, which is kind of sad. It doesn't have any IP certification. So, I mean, you shouldn't really put water in your phone anyway, but the iPhone XR does have the advantage here in terms of overall protection. Now, here's the interesting thing. In terms of software, this is where it gets kind of messy. I'm not 100% positive if the iPhone SE is going to stop when the iPhone 6S stops in terms of software update, or if it stops when the iPhone 7. So it started off on iOS 9.3.2, which was the ending of iOS 9 pretty much. So that makes me kind of think that it's going to last as long as the iPhone 7, but I could be wrong. So either the iPhone SE stopping at iOS 13 or iOS 14. I don't know yet, but that's kind of like up in the air still. Whereas on the iPhone XR, obviously, as you guys know, was just released like 25 seconds ago. So it's going to last for pretty much as long as you need to. And you have many, many more years of support on the iPhone XR. I would say we're about midway through the iPhone SE software cycle. So either if it gets 2 more years of support or 3 more years of support, we don't know yet. But I will still say that it's going to last. Both phones are going to last you a little bit longer. If you plan on switching your phones every 2 years or 3 years, I mean, I guess both phones will suffice. But obviously, if I had to choose one, the iPhone XR, because it's going to last much longer in terms of software. Now, in terms of hardware and the specs of this phone, the iPhone SE has the Apple A9 chip, a dual-core CPU, and 2 gigabytes of RAM, where the iPhone XR has an Apple A12 Bionic chip, an extra-core CPU, and 3 gigabytes of RAM. So the iPhone XR does have an extra gigabyte of RAM, which is pretty cool. I am kind of interested to see how these phones do run, so I'm going to do a speed comparison a little bit. I feel like that's better than just me talking over and just kind of explaining it, so we can kind of see a better glimpse of how these phones hold up in terms of opening speeds and loading speeds. So let's see the speed comparison I just ran. Now again, like I said, my microphone for my camera broke, so I'm not talking over it, but I honestly like this setup better of me talking over the speed comparison. I'm not going to talk over it. I'm just going to say that I'm just going to put a song over it. The song name is Coconut Cream Pie. It's the one I made. I'm dropping a mixtape very, very soon. And if you want the link to the song, it's on my SoundCloud, which is down in the description. So I'd really appreciate if you guys check it out. But enjoy the speed comparison. Alright, now that we're back from the speed comparison, let's briefly talk about the cameras. Now, I'm just going to say that the iPhone XR camera is better. There's no doubt about it, because not only is the hardware better, technically speaking, they're the same megapixel count, 12 megapixels, but the iPhone XR also has software that the iPhone SE does not have. And one of those things is portrait mode, which allows you to kind of get a more portrait, a professional looking photo of people. Now, it only works for people on the iPhone XR and not like dogs or cats or something like that. But what I will say is that not only is that better, but you also have more video frame speed resolutions and recording frame rates on the iPhone XR than you do on the iPhone SE. So you can shoot 4K videos on both, so that's good on both phones. But on the iPhone XR, you are able to shoot 4K at up to 60 frames per second, and you can shoot 1080p at up to 240 frames per second, whereas you can only shoot 4K at 30 frames and 1080p at 120 frames on the iPhone SE. So that in and of itself might be a reason for you to pick up an iPhone XR, but I'll say that a lot of people out there still shoot in 1080p, including me. I only shoot my videos in 1080p. I don't see myself going in 4K for maybe like a year or two. So 1080p is still fine. It's going to be perfectly fine. And even the iPhone SE still has 4K capability. So in case for some reason next month everyone just starts shooting in 4K, you have the capability of shooting in that on this phone. So it's pretty cool on both. I will still give the edge to the iPhone XR just because it does have software capability that the iPhone SE does not have. Now, another thing to note is that the front camera, if you weren't looking at them, you would probably think they were the same. You could probably tell the iPhone XR is better just because the screen is bigger and kind of has that illusion. But what I will say is that we're comparing a 7 megapixel front-facing camera on the iPhone XR to a 1.2 megapixel front-facing camera on the iPhone SE. Now, megapixels are not everything. I still think the iPhone SE is comparable to like an iPhone 6s front-facing camera that has 5 megapixels. But what I will say is that because it's such a low megapixel count, you can only shoot 720p videos on the front-facing camera of the iPhone SE. So that is kind of a downgrade because you're able to shoot 1080p at up to 60 frames per second on the iPhone XR's front camera. So again, it's just kind of like, are you going to use the front camera all that often? Obviously, the XR is better. You do have the same kind of functionality on the iPhone SE, but I just think a 1.2 megapixel front-facing camera is okay, but I just don't think shooting 720p videos on the front camera is good at all, especially if you want to do vlogging or anything like that. Obviously, the iPhone XR will do you much better here. Now, another interesting thing to note, if you were to look at both phones, honestly, I was thinking, before I even looked at the specs or anything, that the iPhone XR was going to have worse battery life than the iPhone SE, and this was during the release. When Phil Schiller, whatever his name was, my dad, he was on the stage, and he was talking about the iPhone XR and all that stuff. I pretty much saw that, okay, it's a bigger screen, this and that. It might have worse battery life than the SE. I don't know why I was thinking about that. But it turns out the iPhone SE has worse battery life than the iPhone XR. And a lot of things factor into it. But the main thing is that the size of the battery is much, much larger on the iPhone XR than it is on the iPhone SE. So on the iPhone SE, it had a 1,624 mAh battery. On the iPhone XR, it has a 2,942 mAh battery. So as a whole, right there kind of tells you like it's almost twice the size of battery on the iPhone XR. And you also have a new optimized chip. Now you do have a little bit of a performance increase in terms of the specs and everything, but even with that being said, I will still give the edge to the iPhone XR. And I found that on iOS 12, the iPhone SE's battery life did increase quite a bit, but I still don't think it's on par with the iPhone XR, which isn't a bad thing. You know, the iPhone SE had its time and place, but definitely the iPhone XR is a much better option here in terms of battery life. Now, some other notable things to note, like I said, the size is a humongous difference between them. The iPhone SE is much, much smaller than the iPhone XR, but you do kind of have some advantages with the SE's body. You still have the headphone jack, you still have the home button and Touch ID, so a lot of people like that, a lot of people don't, and some people might like the smaller body, so that could be a pro for you as well. Now, in the iPhone XR, you do have wireless charging, which is super cool, which includes a glass back. So the reason the iPhone XR has the glass back is to include wireless charging. The iPhone SE does have like two glass panels on the top and bottom on the back, but I still think the iPhone XR feels way more premium. And I just feel like the iPhone XR kind of feels like an iPhone 6s or 6s Plus with glass on the back, which is kind of funny if you think about it. And like I said, the iPhone XR has IP67 dust and water resistance, where the iPhone SE does not. So I'll break down some scenarios for you. You can kind of fill in the gaps for your specific situation. Now, what I'll say is, if you currently have an iPhone SE and you have an upgrade or something, I would definitely recommend an iPhone XR. It's cheaper than the XS and XS Max. It's not a horrible option. If you need to get a brand new iPhone for some reason, I mean, I guess an iPhone XR is a good option, but I also think an iPhone 8 Plus brand new is still a good option as well. And I think in a lot of cases, the iPhone 8 Plus might be a better option for you if you have an upgrade and if you have to get a brand new iPhone. Now, in the next situation, it applies for everyone else, okay? If you have an older iPhone, you don't even have an iPhone SE, you have like an iPhone 4, or you have like an LG G2 or a Samsung Galaxy S4 or something like that, I will say, instead of getting an iPhone XR, which out the door would pretty much cost you $800 if you get the 64 gigabyte variant, because of taxes and stuff. What I'll say is just buy a used iPhone 10, okay? That's probably the best way to go about doing it. You can find one for less than the cost of a brand new iPhone 10R, and I still think a used iPhone 10 is better than a brand new iPhone 10R. And I already did a speed comparison and a full-on comparison between those two, and I still said that the iPhone 10 is a much better phone than the iPhone 10R. So what I'll say is get an iPhone 10R if you need to get a brand new iPhone, or even get an iPhone 8 Plus that's brand new from the Apple Store, which costs cheaper. But I would still probably recommend a used iPhone 10 over all those other iPhones right now in terms of price and value per dollar. But that is just my opinion, guys. You can have your own assumptions, and that's kind of what I'm thinking. Now, if you want to get a certified refurbished iPhone 10, which costs a little bit more than used, but they do come straight from you and they have a warranty and they're from Amazon, so I'll leave one of those linked down below. Every single thing you buy from those links actually helps support the channel, so you guys can check those out if you want to. I'd really appreciate it. But that is pretty much it. If you guys have any questions or anything like that, leave it down in the comment section below. Hit that like button, that'll mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber we get really does count, so it'll mean so much if you guys could hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my second channel that is also linked down below. I do a lot of iOS comparisons and everything like that, so I definitely appreciate if you guys could check that out. But more importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.